Hello, everyone. After that introduction, I don't think I need to say more about Andy or about why we're putting this convening together. I will just use the opportunity to welcome you very, very warmly and thank you for making the time to join us today, both to our panelists and to our attendees and participants. And also share with you before I hand the mic over to our co-curator for the session today, the team from Arthan and Anchal, who will be our moderator, to run you through the session. Invite you to please join us and actively participate today and in the next 2 days, where we've carefully curated sessions that our partners, like Arthan, have told us are important for the ecosystems from which they come from in the context of the South Asian region. So with that, Anchal, over to you to take this session forward.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sucharita. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel today. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Anchal, and I'm part of the founding team at Arthan. Arthan has been around for about close to a decade now, and the core part of our work has been building the ecosystem through our work around thought leadership. So while we do work on talent, we work on organizational development. Something that has been very critical from day one is to bring ecosystem partners together to co-curate solutions and also work towards actioning them. So very excited about this panel. Thank you so much to the Andy team to work with us on this panel, and thank you so much to our panelists Megha, Aprajita, and Annette to have joined us today. I will just give a very brief introduction to what this panel really entails, and then I'll move on to the panelists to introduce themselves and to share their thoughts in this discussion. So, today's panel essentially is looking at work skills and equity, shaping a future that works for all. To share some context, I think we're all very well aware that not only in Asia, but across the world of work is really being reshaped in a very, very dynamic fashion. So, whether it is advancements in AI or climate disruptions or distress migration, or even the way we work, so whether it's looking at the gig economy, platform based work, the world of work is changing really, really rapidly. And while the world of work is changing, the world of really looking at how do you skill people is still somewhat looking into the traditional ways of skilling. So as a result of that, there is a deep mismatch between how people actually work and how training, recognition, and protection are structured. And it's a lot more complex when we look at the informal economy, and when we look at countries in South Asia, whether it's India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. About 80% of our workforce belongs to the informal economy. So looking at solutions here, it gets a lot more complicated. So what we are really trying to look at in today's session is that how do we work on building skills that are very relevant, but at the same time working towards a world of work that is deeply rooted in equity and inclusion. So given this backdrop, it is critical to ask what it takes to build a future of work in South Asia that is inclusive, adaptive, and rooted in equity. And this panel will surface grounded perspectives from experts across the region to understand how dignity, agency, and resilience can be built into our evolving labor systems. So that was the introduction. We do encourage you to please share your comments, and reach out if you have any thoughts during the conversation as well. So I'll start off the conversation in terms of looking at the first question that I want each of the panelists to share their thoughts on, and I'll perhaps start with Megha. So Megha is a senior advisor, private sector, Gates Foundation. So Megha, my question to you is really, it'd be great, if you can give a brief overview about the work that you're doing to help everyone understand the work you do and your prior experience. And I'd like you to answer questions around these two two areas. So, one is how do you see the changing nature of work playing out across South Asia, especially looking at informal, migrant, gig based livelihoods, and what kind of skills, support systems, and strategies have you observed helping people navigate uncertainty while maintaining dignity and agency? So, this is an overarching question that I'd like all the panelists to answer, but Megha, specifically for you, my question is given the shift towards platform based work, digital services, migration, and informal economies across South Asia, what role do you see philanthropy, private sector engagement, and funder driven partnerships play over here? And yes, over to you, Megha.
Thank you, Anjul. I would like to first of all thank Andy team, Sucharita, Anjul from Arthan, to put together this very timely session. It's a pleasure to be here. As Anjul mentioned, I lead the private sector engagement at the India office of the Gates Foundation. You may already know about the foundation, but the foundation has been working globally for over 25 years now. Our larger objective is to improve the lives of marginalized communities in the communities and in the geographies that we work in. And we largely work across six pillars or sectoral areas, including healthcare, financial services, agriculture, sanitation, gender equality, and education. Within gender equality, women's economic empowerment is a key piece of work for us, where we try and see how do we help get more and more women into quality jobs and help nano and micro entrepreneurs scale so that they can have income and agency over their income as well. I work as a horizontal, so I work with the various different teams on the private sector partnerships. The basic theory of change for us is that we see private sector as a very key player across the sectors that we work in. And we believe that a lot of sustainability to the work that we do would also come from the private sector. And hence, if there is an opportunity to embed the pro-poor, pro-gender intentionality within the business models of the private sector, I think it would create a win-win for everyone. The markets or the segments that we care about are very large market segments. Today, the private sector is not meaningfully serving those segments because of certain market failures. So my team works in this regard with various private sector players to solve for those market failures and mobilize capital and capacities from their end in a meaningful way. Um, Coming back to the questions, uh, Anshul, that you put forward, um, I think when we talk about the changing nature of work in South Asia, we have to think at scale. You know, the region has been adding millions of workers each year for the last 2 decades. Just some statistics, but South Asia created about 10 million jobs annually between, the last few years, where there was a corresponding increase of about 19 million people in working age population each year as well. The World Bank estimates that about 75 to 90% of the subcontinent's workers are informal in roles, and that won't change overnight, right? And there are a few forces which are shaping this, including digitalization and platformization, increasing automation and new service models. There is this whole angle on climate variability as well. From the perspective of philanthropies and private sector engagement and funder driven partnerships, I see philanthropy and private sector players as important accelerators for the trends which are already underway. Government and large employers are the primary scalers. And the region has built strong digital and institutional foundations. Where philanthropy really adds value is in shaping how these systems evolve so that they work for workers with variable incomes, lower digital literacy, or mobility constraints as well. So I would think about the role of philanthropies in largely three buckets. The first one, which is also very important for us, is to see how do you build evidence for worker-centric and gender-intentional models. Philanthropic money can test early ideas, show what works, and build a business case. So, for instance, in our work with Game, where we are working with Amazon Saheli, we've been studying what helps women entrepreneurs thrive on digital platforms, what reduces the drop off, what increases their earning potential. And we have seen immense potential in the first phase of work. Additionally, with employer, where a significant portion of the workforce includes migrants, informal workforce, contractual workers, we have seen business benefits which emerge from the well-being programs, including nutritional engagements, which can actually improve both the worker well-being as well as the business outcomes for the private sector players as well. So that's one. The second, I think, area for philanthropies would be to build inclusive foundational goals that actually enable participation. So, we all are very aware that South Asia has strong digital rails. Now, philanthropy can help ensure that they work for the informal and platform workers. Aadhaar, for example, can be leveraged to implement social security benefits for the gig and the platform workforce, also according to the new labor codes. We are also working closely with emerging digital public infrastructure and goods like the account aggregator framework, and are exploring ways in which we can unlock fit for purpose financial products for segments including three-wheeler drivers, small and medium businesses, also dairy farmers. So, in all, these systems improve how workers interact with market and earn sustainably. The more intentionally they are designed for variable incomes, the more people they can positively impact. I think the third area, which is top of mind for me, is strengthening institutional capacity in local ecosystem. We are seeing a rise in aggregator-driven, community-focused approaches. Philanthropy can help them grow. So, for instance, in collaboration with our Amazon Saheli program, we work closely with women collectives to build institutional capacity to thrive on digital markets and platforms. We are also exploring a similar approach for women sellers, which are onboarding through the ONDC protocol. This helps women entrepreneurs and gig workers navigate digital tools and market linkages. Um, we worked with another startup called Air Black through this program with a partner called Game, where we have supported the development of an app called Zudo app, which provides free and high quality courses for beauty and makeup artists, many of whom are building independent and flexible careers. So these partnerships really strengthen both community resilience and market alignment. So I think a unique strength of philanthropy is that it can harmonize business value and worker value. We can pilot new models, support robust measurement and learning, and de-risk early innovation until it becomes commercially viable or ready for government adoption. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Megha. I think that was really, really clear in terms of understanding exactly what sort of role that philanthropy can play. And certainly the point that you mentioned around the ability to test early ideas, I think that's something which, we would look at the private sector to, continue to support on. And thank you for sharing the examples of the work that you're doing with Amazon, and the kind of impact that is creating. So really good to hear about that, and I would love to hear more about that, when we come back to you. I'll now move on to Aprajita. So just to introduce Aprajita is the Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships for Value for Women. So Aprajita, welcome. For you as well, while it'll be great to understand, to get an introduction from you in terms of, the scope of work that you are looking at, linked to this conversation. Specifically, would love to understand from you that in South Asia, where informal labor and small entrepreneurs are very common, what kind of gender smart strategies for inclusive entrepreneurship and livelihood support have proven effective in your work, or that could potentially be scaled? So over to you.
Thanks, Achal, and thanks to Charita, Vinita, and the Andy team for bringing us all together for this important topic. Maybe just as a quick introduction, I'm Aprajita. I work with Value for Women, and Value for Women is a women-led global organization that creates opportunities for women in emerging economies as leaders, as employees, and as consumers. Since 2012, when we were set up, we've been working with businesses, financial institutions, investors, donors, and other stakeholders to advance women's participation and leadership, driving both impact and economic growth. We've been pioneers in designing and delivering gender-smart technical assistance to the private sector, and my role oversees a lot of what we do as part of our advisory services, but also as new initiatives where we are spotting gaps in the ecosystem and creating solutions and innovations to fulfill those gaps. But coming to your question, Achal, across South Asia, we say the future of work is no longer a distant horizon. It's already here for women, for migrants, for home-based workers and small entrepreneurs. We are living it, and it has become our day-to-day reality. What we see every day at Value for Women is that a majority of women are navigating work that is informal, seasonal, or it's shaped by caregiving responsibilities. And post-COVID, I think this has become more of an acute situation. Their reality is not a linear employment. It's usually a portfolio of fluid livelihood opportunities, and that includes a lot of folks like us here in this panel, which might be working in almost full-time jobs, but we are constantly sort of juggling multiple responsibilities or roles as well. And I think what we are seeing is with a majority of women also that the systems around them, however, still presume stable, male breadwinner kind of formal linear work. And if I have to think about like three sort of key reflections or quick reflections from what we see across South Asia, especially when we look at women navigating informal or low wage work, there's the first one is that skills are far more than technical ability, right? The women we work with succeed not because they pick up one specific technical skill, but because they're building the capabilities that are allowing them to navigate that uncertainty. This includes agency or confidence to negotiate, the ability to navigate between different income streams or livelihood opportunities, and something as simple but transformative as digital comfort. We're not talking about advanced tech skills, just the confidence to sometimes use a phone, a payment wallet, a WhatsApp group, and perhaps the most underrated skill is just having that peer network. For women in informal work, that network is often the safety net. It's the information source. It's the pathway to future opportunities. The second reflection we often talk about is that flexibility and dignity matters more than scale sometimes. So we want to emphasize that small shifts in flexibility and dignity go much further than big programs. So I'm going to talk about an example from our work with Ishuran Brothers. They are a tea exporter in Sri Lanka. We recently supported through a technical assistance facility from FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. We recently supported a workplace inclusion initiative. And we found that 33% of mothers were resigning within a year of returning from maternity leave. So the company introduced some very simple measures, flexible hours, peer buddies, structured check-ins for new parents, and the result was almost immediate. Every returning parent in the pilot reported lower stress, they reported higher confidence and far better retention. And then going to sort of the third reflection, in many SMEs, we see that this future of work is shaped far more by manager behavior than by technology or CRMs or AI even. At Ishuran Brothers, for example, when the company invested in coaching just 7 mid-level managers on inclusive leadership, it ended up influencing more than 200 employees on the factory floor. That one intervention shifted how managers identified talent, how they perceived their support that they could extend to women, and how they understood who looks like a leader. So manager mindsets, how they listen, how they assign opportunities, how they support caregivers are absolutely part of the skills ecosystem. So I'm going to stop there, and also will share the link to the published case study we have on Ishuran Brothers, and they've been doing quite a lot of conversations around this in the sector as well. So I'm very happy to share more insights from that work.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Aparajita. I think what really stood out to me was when you mentioned that in terms of the work that women do, there is a portfolio of work that they need to look at, and I think it completely ties into what you're also mentioning as a solution, right? Like flexibility. That's a core of what is required, and also looking at dignity across, right? So when you mentioned the example around manager behavior, I think that's relevant for everyone regardless of gender. So thank you for sharing the case study. I think that we'd all love to learn more about that and to hear from you when you come back to your second question. So now over to Annette. Thank you for waiting, Annette. So introducing Annette. Annette is a director of skilling, entrepreneurship, and livelihoods at Pratham Education Foundation. So really looking forward to hearing from you on the skilling piece, Annette. And my question to you is, how do you think skilling ecosystems must evolve to meet the realities of seasonal work, climate-sensitive livelihoods, migration, and informality, rather than presuming stable and formal employment? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Anshul. And really, it's been great to hear my co-panelists also speak. I'm also learning a lot, I think, through this webinar. I'll start off with giving a little context around the work Pratham does and just to help shape the answer. Pratham has been in the skill development space since 2005, and currently we train over 35,000 youth annually in blue-collar roles, and we follow the very standard NCC model of placing young people in jobs. And over the last few years, we have been able to see the journey of more than 300,000 youth. And I think that's what's really taught us a lot about this ecosystem. And the reality is that we are at a juncture where skill development organizations and industry need to work really hand in hand in order to ensure that young people are best prepared for the future of work. So, what we say is that we will train people to be trained further, and then it's over to the industry to make sure that people adapt to the needs of the ecosystem. Because the rate at which industry is evolving, the rate at which skills are changing is too rapid for any training program to cover all your bases. Because a skill that is in high demand today, 2 years from now, would have evolved into a slightly different skill, where if your foundations are solid, you will be able to adapt. But if your foundations are not set, then you're going to really struggle to be able to keep up with that. And I think that's where skill development organizations are really focused, is to ensure that young people are given the right space. And given today's focus on climate resilient livelihoods, I think being able to develop enough empathy and a sort of adaptable mindset is probably what we really need to strive towards. One of the challenges that I can anticipate for us as we move forward is that in India, like I believe Megha also mentioned, that we are largely an informal economy, and most of our training mechanisms are also designed for that informal economy. And we have a very few handful of jobs that are designed formal for the formal economy base. So there is a conversation around how do we create more jobs or else make existing jobs more suitable for the needs of our workforce. And I think that is going to influence the skill development movement in a big way. If the form, and I think with the new labor codes and other such things coming into the picture, we might see a more rapid movement towards formalization. And I think as that happens, we'll also be able to have conversations around things like transferable credit systems, recognition of skills across borders and elements like that, which might be more commonplace in other parts of the world, but are yet to take shape in South Asia. And it'll be very exciting for us to see how that moves forward. But I think it's very important that we realize that one of the opportunities we have is human capital, but the challenges we have is that our human capital isn't foundation ready at this point of time, and we really need to be putting the efforts to make sure that that is set in base. And it's that collaboration between civil society, industry, and government that is really going to ensure we make it through towards the end. And we're all learning a lot, but there is definitely a need for collaborative sharing of these pieces. The last bit that I will add before I stop is when we analyze the journey of our alumni as they were leaving our training program and going to work, and we saw that we were trying to figure out essentially what factors actually determine your success. So we looked at education qualification, we looked at parental background, income levels, we looked at the different industries. And really, what we found out is that the young people who stayed on in the workforce longer just had better probability of staying in the workforce longer. And that sounds very intuitive in some ways, but it is very different from the way young people view their lives, where often the perspective is that, okay, I've been trained today. I don't really need to, I'll join a job tomorrow, but I don't really like this job. So let me leave this job and step out of the workforce for some period of time and I can come back in. And what we really are seeing is that that ability to come back into the workforce is where the difficulty exists today, because just based on the number of jobs that exist versus the number of people applying for those jobs, you have to be able to seize every opportunity to enter the workforce. And then once you're there, the current will take you forward, is what we've really seen. That if you stay on, so if you work, I can't remember who is it that said this, but if you work for a day, you're trained for the week. If you work for a week, you're trained for the month. And if you work for the month, you're trained for the entire year, right? So that's the way skill development is moving forward right now. And so we really need to figure out whether we are able to get young people to just start out for that day and build that resilient mindset to survive longer. And there's a lot that skill development organizations need to do from a social emotional learning perspective, from a technical training perspective, and all to ensure that uh, young people are best prepared for these for the challenges of the workforce. But it's not as straightforward as we imagined. And there are definitely factors which enable and deter young people from being able to get into the workforce. So it's one step at a time, but we really need to get to it. And I think if we're able to create that space for young people to enter the workforce seamlessly, we might actually be putting them onto a pathway of lifelong learning where they will be able to consistently adapt and build new skills and then just flow with the current of the future of work. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Annette. I think very interesting the insight that you shared. I think a lot of us who probably don't work in skilling would not think of it along those lines. So, really stressing on the resilience piece, I think that's something that we really need to look into, and then providing that support across the journey, and also noting the point you mentioned around empathy and having an adaptable mindset. So, I think with as we all, I think a lot of us, when we start working with even the younger generation now, I think that's an element that the generation is really looking into, right? So I think it's important to foster that very diligently and in somewhat a structured strategic manner. So thanks a lot for sharing this, Annette. Requesting everyone in the audience to please also share their questions in the chat. We will get to them. We will have a separate section around audience Q&A, so you can keep sharing your questions. We can come back to that, but for now I'll move on to my second and my final question to all the panelists. So this is a common question I have for all of you. So I'll just read it out right now for everyone together. So looking ahead, what kinds of regional collaboration, policy frameworks, social protection mechanisms, or cross-country recognition systems are needed in South Asia to ensure informal, migrant, climate sensitive, gig and care economy workers have access to dignified work, lifelong learning, and protection, not in just one country, but across borders? I understand this is, moving a little away from the conversation that we were having so far, which was slightly more India centric, in some cases, but would love to understand from each one of you, how do we look at this as like as an Asia, South Asia challenge and the opportunities. So I'll open the floor to all three speakers, whoever would like to go first. Yeah, please, looking to hear from you.
Thanks, Anjal. Maybe I'll go first in the same order. So, I think in this regard, three things stand out for me, and something that the co-panelists have also touched upon. The first one is portable skills and credentials. If we can align on training, experience, and competencies across borders and across states within countries, workers, especially migrants, can move confidently and access better opportunities. The second point for me would be shared digital standards. So, regional alignment on identity, payments, and verification systems can make it easier for workers and micro entrepreneurs to participate in cross border supply chains and digital services. And I think the third one would be more peer learning among countries. South Asia has rich examples of platform innovations, community based models, and digital public infrastructure. Sharing these openly, whether through government networks, through industry coalitions, or worker organization, can actually raise the floor for everyone. See, the region's greatest strength is its young, adaptive workforce. If countries can collaborate on recognition of those skilling training programs, digital pathways, and mobility, we have an opportunity to create a more inclusive South Asian labor market that really offers dignity, resilience, and opportunities at scale to the evolving workforce. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
to
you,
come in,
Megha.
Anshul. That
Yes,
helps.
please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I was thinking, Megha talked about a couple of key things that I think are absolutely must. And, thinking about portability, thinking about some sort of regional standards. But I think there are a couple of additional points that I would just add there. One, in some of our work, we've seen the recognition of care work as an economic system and how that sort of lacks. And I think that especially with the informal workers or with women in the workforce, especially in the informal economy, we are seeing more and more of that becoming a barrier. It's not a gender issue alone. It's just something that actually comes in the way of building this regional economic engine. And with the demographic pressure, the migration patterns, and the care gaps that we have in our infrastructure, I think that's a key one. And it's completely kind of lacking in terms of, while there may be some work around this in infrastructure at a city level or at a state level, it's completely lacking when we think about it at a regional or cross-border sort of a level. The other, I would say, is around climate responsive livelihood protections. This climate shocks and how they are driving migration and how the livelihoods are shifting across countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka. There is really no or lack of social protection there. There are obviously we need early warning systems. We need to think about emergency cash transfers, reskilling pathways. Many of us here on this panel, I'm sure, employ people who are coming in this sort of, who are coming from that economic background or who are migrants. And we see them all facing this. And even as somebody who's working in this space, struggle to sort of find the solutions for them. It's something as simple as remitting money to Nepal is like such a hassle, and so dependent on the digital identity and the trail that workers themselves have. So again, like there's and this then further gets exacerbated when you have climate shocks coming in. And then I would say finally, thinking also about the recognition of skills for women in low wage sectors. South Asia, especially as a region, could benefit if there was some kind of a mutual recognition of skills in sectors where women are overrepresented or have a fair representation. You think about care work, you think about food processing, textiles, or micro entrepreneurship. We don't want mobility to push women back into informal, unprotected work. So there's definitely something there that needs to be done and solved for. And while there's work happening there, it's just not happening at the scale that we'd all like to see. So yeah, I'll stop there and hand over to Annette.
Thank you so much, Apratita. So, I completely echo all the sentiments shared within the panel. And I think my 2 cents over here would be one, focusing on the role model effect. One of the key drivers that we have seen within communities, especially given, cultural context within South Asia, is that for something to really take root and for it to spread, you need to have the relatable role model effect working in your favor. And for a long time, our systems have glorified certain archetypes, probably through whether it's through our education system or through our financial reward mechanisms and such. There are specific archetypes that we might have been showcasing, and the future of work demands slightly different archetypes to be showcased. You need to have different types of stories coming to the forefront. And I think to make the policies work, to make the norms become more rooted in community, we need to bring those role model stories out there, because that's how it spreads. And while we take care of this from the community side, I cannot stress enough the element around the transferability of our skills and the recognition that we offer to credit, like whether it's our credentials, whether it's our work experience. Too much of what is there in our system today is informal, and while that has allowed us to grow very quickly, in order to go to the next phase, we need to be able to formalize a lot more elements just to allow young people to have that adaptability across systems. And this is both not just cross-border within the domain, but even within countries having that ability to transfer recognition and credentials, because even that is very weak. And say even in a context like India, from one state to the other, also the transferability of experience of credits is not as streamlined as one would like it to be. So I think there is a lot to be done on that space. And the last element that I think I would want to echo is just how do we create that network of relationships at the community level and at the young people level? Because at this point of time, we know we have the networks exist at the formal C-suite levels. How do you bring that down to the entry level workers so that they are able to tap into each other's networks? Because in order to make migration seamless, you need to have the resources that you need while you are migrating. For women to be able to explore opportunities which other women may not have explored in the past, you again need those peer groups. So creating that network effect on the ground in a more seamless manner and through structural mechanisms is something that a lot of people, I think, are trying towards, and we need to figure out what solutions can be best scaled up as we move forward. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, all of you. Have it's very helpful that you've all given such actionable, specific points that really we can look towards working on as solutions. And it's good to see that there's also a lot of I would say uniformity in a way, that in terms of the solutions you've all given. So in terms of transferability of experience and so on. So it's aligned in a way, but along with that, it's good to have additional solutions that each one of you, through your respective experience, have been able to share with us. I would like to now open up the conversation to the audience. It would be great to have your questions if you can share them over here in the chat, and also if you could mention, who is the question directed at. So,
Anchal, the question is in the Q&A box. If you look, we have one question.
oh yes, thanks. Um, Great. So we have one question. This says, are there any case studies and best practices to integrate women workforce in non-female dominated industries such as heavy machinery? So I'll open that up to all the speakers if they'd like to share their thoughts on this.
If I could share just a very quick example from my side. At Pratham, we try to do training for women into industries like automotive, electrical, and so on. For years, women were getting trained in very traditional courses like beauty, healthcare. And it's in the last, I would say, 5, 6 years that we've been trying to push the enrollment of women towards these non-traditional industries. And the real thing that worked for us is being able to glorify role model stories at the community level. So we have this one village, and I take the example of this village every time because we managed to actually get a video done of it. But this is a village in Aurangabad district in Maharashtra, and we have at this point of time more than 50 young women who have become electricians from just that one village. And it happened extremely organically, simply because we managed to mobilize 5 young women in the beginning of a year. And then with every passing batch, we ended up getting two, three women from that same village. And it just got to a point where it became so normalized for young women to be able to go and pursue that trade that now electrical is no longer perceived as a non-traditional trade in that community. So the power that role models have and the role model effect has is incredible. how do you sort of compound it with institutional efforts is definitely something for us to all consider. But that's definitely one example that I would want to share. Megha and Aprajita here.
Yes.
Thank you, Annette, and I agree with you. For us, this was a very interesting problem statement, and in fact, we are doing a project just now to exactly, create this evidence. So the problem statement was that if you look at the large employers in India today, manufacturing sector is a very large employer, right? But the women workforce participation remains dismal in the manufacturing sector. Traditionally, this has been the case, but if you see lately, a few trends are emerging. One is that there is a lot of attrition, absenteeism, which happens, at the shop floors, in the firms, in the manufacturing sector, right? And there is a big cost associated with that because the employers would have to retrain, would have to re-employ, etc. The second is that because of automation, the nature of jobs are also changing, which makes it more suitable for women going forward. So what we did is we try to understand that in the manufacturing sector, is there a potential, is there a business case to hire more women, retain more women, and advance them to leadership positions as well? So we started working with a subset of the manufacturing sector, which employs a large set of manufacturing sector people, which is automotive sector. So we started working with two large industry associations, ACMA and SIAM, to one, understand if there is an appetite for the firms to do that. And, it was quite surprising that, a lot of firms were thinking of hiring more women, but they did not know what were the tools to hire and retain more women into the workforce. So we got together a gender consortium where we work with large auto component firms, some of the large OEMs, and it's a three-phase project where we are trying to one, understand the challenges in hiring more women. In the second phase, we're trying to create a toolkit which helps the firm overcome some of those challenges. And in the third phase, we're doing some pilots on the factory shop floors to see the evidence. Now, the hope is that one will be able to create the toolkit, but also the evidence that hiring more women into the workforce is actually not a cost or an expense as it has been looked upon, but actually a business case where it leads to increasing productivity, decreasing attrition, decreasing absenteeism, and hence increasing your top and bottom line. So I think we have some early exciting results, but we want to do it more at a sectoral level in automotive as well as finally to the manufacturing sector so that we can increase our women workforce participation over here. Thank you. Passing it on to Aprajita.
Thanks, Megha. Yeah, maybe just to add some quick examples and inputs from our work and what we've seen. I just also shared on the Q&A tab, shared an example of a work that we were doing, of this partnership that we were involved in with women. It's a program called Women for Green Jobs. It was implemented by Shortlist, and we were one of the partners on this. This was part of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet partnership. And in this program, there was a target really for having 750 women transition into clean energy careers, which is really manufacturing sector, factory floors, where traditionally this is a male-dominated sector, and this was across Africa, several African countries, but a very relatable example for the Asia region as well. And this is where we applied many different sort of enablers. Some of our foundational work has also traditionally sat in the financial inclusion and agri space, again, where we see a lot of invisible women workforce or male-dominated workforces. And again, like the kind of enablers we've seen is around building more structured training and technical upskilling. This could be on-the-job training. This could be those cohorts, the networks that we've talked about in this panel as well. How do you help sort of create opportunities? How does the employer or that sector create opportunities for women to acquire the relevant technical, mechanical skill, often soft skills as well? But more beyond what you can train the women, and we do have this motto about not changing the women, but really changing the system. we often look at what the structural barriers there are, and oftentimes it could be training the managers or training the teams or the leadership or building the awareness and ensuring that there's enough sort of data-backed rationale to be made for the leadership to invest in what's needed. And oftentimes the solutions are often fairly low cost. It's really the time and the intentionality that needs to see it through, and with the right support. We've seen a lot of good results from mentorship coaching, not necessarily for the women in the workforce, but for senior leadership, for managers on the job, for hiring or officers, for example. And that's really been quite a game changer as well. More transparent hiring and promotion pathways, and that's something we uncover a lot in semi-formal jobs, even informal jobs, as long as the more the women in the workforce are clear that there is an opportunity for them, that there's something beyond what they are involved in, even as a gig worker, that kind of keeps them in, and it's definitely an enabler. And then flexibility, we talked about this earlier in the session as well. Flexible policies, supporting for people who are coming back, life cycle transition. This goes again, like it's not just for women, both men and women. Again, how do you look at life cycle transition, and where can the employers support them or the sectors support them? And then again, for like the private sector side, looking at how can we build more deliberate investor engagement, because face it, whether we like it or not, a lot of this is still top down. A lot of the mandates around gender are still driven by donors and investors coming in and really pushing better standards, better accountability structures. So that's another place where there's a lot to be done in terms of how can we actually do this in HOTS, and not just like 1 and 2 and 5 people, investors being convinced. Back to you, Anshul.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of you for sharing very, very specific responses for a very niche question. So it's good to hear that there's already work that you guys are doing in the space, and that can be leveraged for this particular query that someone in the audience had. Any more questions from the audience?
We don't have anything in Q&A, Achal, as of now. So you can, please take this conversation forward. We'll give folks a little more time if they have
Sure.
questions.
Sure. So Sucharita, I was planning to sort of summarize what all the panelists spoke about. So should I just go ahead and do that right now, or?
I have one question for the
Yes,
panelists. I'm
please.
happy to
Please
ask
go ahead.
it myself.
Yes.
So you've alluded to some of this, right? Megha, yourself, Aparajita, you as well, speaking about donors and the role that they actually play. So my question really was about, donors and corporates. It's a big mandate, right? In many of our South Asian economies, in India for sure, right? Skilling. So I think the question I'm getting at is, but they're typically around people trained, right? So my question is, how can we shift incentive structures to focus more on long-term outcomes? I do know these are hard to measure, and that's one of the challenges. But given your experience, how can we get the private sector, right? There's the role for government, but we're all private sector folks here. So I think it's good for us as the private sector to see what it is we can do. But how can we shift that incentive structure towards long-term earnings, like earning stability, resilience, mobility for vulnerable workers, right? Some of this is just an adaptation question, right? We've focused so much on mitigation, but I guess my question is, what might we be able to do to address these specific longer-term outcomes, in your opinion / experience?
Thank you, Sucharita, and I can go first. See, if I may frame it like that, private sector would work in two situations. One is when they see profitability, better top line, better bottom line, and second, when they have to comply to certain regulations, right? Now, I think our objective has been in our work with the private sector is to see how they can see efficiency and profitability and equity. right? Unless it becomes a business case for the private sector, it's very difficult to ensure long-term sustainable deployment of their capacities and their capital. So I think a lot of evidence around this, as well as like I touched upon earlier, just the way, just to bring it together for the private sector. So I'll take an example over here. In our auto sector work, we saw that there are certain large problem statements for each one of the auto firms when they have to think about hiring more women, right? One big statement is transportation, where maybe transportation may not make sense for one of the auto firms alone, but if we take a cluster of auto firms in one area, there are ways to devise solutions so that it becomes more cost effective for everybody, and together they can provide that mobility solutions to the women workforce, right? So I think what is also important, a role that we feel we play importantly, is the convening. Can you get the collective action going? You can get the private sector, the civil society organization, government, other players together, so that there is an opportunity to build these solutions, which in turn can then be taken over by the private sector in a sustainable way. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
To add-
please go ahead, Annette.
Oh, sorry, Annette, go ahead. I'll come up to you.
Oh, sure. No, thank you so much. I mean, I completely, I understand the sentiment behind the question, and I think it's a very important element to answer. I think the one learning that we've had is that, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that we have very few solutions which are magic wands that have long-term impact, sustained impact without recurring intervention. And I think what we really need people to get excited about is taking candidate A from point A to point Z, even if the impact is then documented as one person impacted. Whereas I think today we have a lot more buy-in about taking a lot of candidates from point A to point B again and again in a loop, as opposed to taking it further down the line. Because the reality is to go from A to B to C and all the way through, there are specific interventions that need to be consistently done. So the effort, like, because we see this in the skill development space where 20 years ago, the thought was if we have the perfect training model, people will line up outside the centers and we will just have everyone training. But then once we got the perfect training model, we realized, oh, young people don't know about this opportunity. So we need to have a mobilization intervention to make sure they get the information to be able to enroll. And then once they started doing that, we realized, oh, training by itself doesn't work. You need to have a placement intervention to make sure that people actually get into the workforce. And now we've reached a stage where we realize that just placing people in jobs is not sufficient. You actually need to handhold them through the initial days of their journey in the workforce. And then there is a case to be made for further upskilling. So I think really what we want to get donors and philanthropy behind is this idea of long-term investment and just being along for the journey, because the nature of the beast is so broad that we really need a variety of solutions. And it's that collective impact that I believe is going to result in sustainability. So how do we bring, and it's not possible for, if a singular organization is going to do this, it's going to take them forever. So how do you bring in that right consortium of partners where different people can take care of different steps of the value chain possibly, but you're still bringing everyone along for the journey so that the learnings can then later be translated. So I think that's maybe one perspective I'd want to bring in. Aprajita, please.
Yeah, I guess maybe just to add, lots of great points already, I think, by Annette, you and Megha. I guess from our perspective, one of the things that we see is that if you need to shift incentives from short-term training numbers, you need to sort of start thinking about how do you reward earning stability by demonstrating that business case for retention. So a lot of our work in our work, and we do quite a bit of technical assistance on gender side, that private sector organizations. I'll quote an example from our work with Roots of Impact. We're working with the Impact Link Finance Facility, and we see that some of their portfolio companies, the employers actually begin to change behavior when they see that the retention and workforce stability, that is being financially rewarded, right? They're not leaving money on the table. They can actually see that when these companies actually see that they're receiving incentives for lower turnover or improved career progression for women, or that when they start investing in training or coaching or flexible systems, it keeps their workers in the job longer. That actually starts changing how employers sort of or companies look at this. In the case of another organization, Mr. Green Africa, this is an SGB in Kenya, we were looking at how they were changing how they were bringing in gender inclusive workforce interventions that we had unearthed with them, and the company trialed measures like alternative shifts. They subsidized transport for women. This is like women waste pickers, and inclusive management training, and all of these started to see optimal sort of quick turnaround, operational benefits. There was reduced absenteeism, there was higher product quality, and just improved morale with the workers, and all of that. For the company, again, the retention, then the goal is no longer how to check the box, because they can kind of see that with retention is coming better lower cost, reduced turnover, and that becomes sort of a productivity strategy that needs to speak to the business reality. And then also thinking about mobility as an explicit outcome, if mobility can truly unlock opportunities for vulnerable workers, how could you move them? How could one move them from informal to more formal work, from low wage roles into more technical roles? That becomes quite interesting as well. Again, quoting Mr. Green Africa, the work that we were doing with this SGB in Nairobi, we saw women move from informal waste picking into more formal employment, which was backed by contracts, protection, some kind of upward pathways in their jobs, and more sort of formal income source, which just improved their resilience to shocks and long-term earning potential. And both the organization, the company that we were working with, as well as the foundation that was funding this work, Alpha Mundi Foundation, were behind this and looking at what changes at a long-term level, so that you don't have to come back at it to just train more people, every 6 months. It's something that's now ingrained in the company's strategy, and things like those also make a big difference. And I think from our perspective, we also see that we often, because I think we have to make the dollar run longer. In our case, when we come as technical assistance partners, we often see this urgency to really set the organization up for success. So what can we do in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, so that they don't need us, because we don't know when they're going to get their next access to the grant that can allow them to build that sort of technical assistance again. So oftentimes it's like, how do you help them set this up so that it's not a one-off training, but it's something that's solving more of the systemic challenge. And again, like offline, happy to share more examples, and I'll plot in a few other links in the chat as well.
Thanks everyone. I actually heard a couple of consistent themes. One was, of course, around collective action. The other was around making the business case, tell them how it impacts their business, amongst a ton of other interesting practical stuff. Parijit, I also heard you talk about, quick wins. That's the reality. We want to talk long-term outcomes, but what is it that we can do in the short and medium term? Thank you. Very, very, very informative responses. Anshul, back to you. I think at this point, we don't have any other questions.
Yeah.
So do feel free to summarize and we can wrap it up.
Yes. Yes, as you just mentioned, Sucharita, I think this has been a very, very informative session for sure, and also it's great that it's embedded in all the experiences and experiments that all the panelists are looking into. So it's been a great deal of learning for me personally as well. So I've been taking notes through the conversation. So I'm just going to summarize some of the themes that emerged from today. So from the first part of the conversation, where I asked specific questions to each of the panelists. So from Megha, it was great to hear the role that the private sector can really play in terms of looking towards building on a workforce or the world of work which is future ready, which is dignified, and the sort of the liberty that the private sector can take in terms of taking risks comparatively, and then building evidence on what can work later. Aprajita, it was great to hear some of the gender responsive strategies that you spoke about, especially around, maybe it's not so urgent to look at very deep technical skills, but looking at even skills around, helping women with building their confidence, agency, and those can go really far. And specifically the points that you mentioned around dignity and flexibility, I think those I think that theme kind of was there through the conversation. And Annette, the examples that you shared around looking at resilience for the workforce, right? So resilience, empathy, and having an adaptive mindset. So I think those are things that I think we will take away from this conversation. And For the common question that we looked into post the introductory part of the conversation, was to look at what are some of the things that will work cross borders. So I think across borders. I'm just going to sum up some of the examples that were shared by all the panelists, from looking at transferability of skills, so portable skills. I think that was a common theme that did emerge. And then looking at shared digital standards, recognizing care work, looking at more climate responsive, mitigating this, looking at climate responsive responses. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at thinking of what the word I can think of post that. And specifically looking at the role model effect. I think that's something that Annette had mentioned. And so again, like, a lot of common themes that did emerge when we look at what solutions are there in terms of looking at this from a cross country perspective. And so thanks all of you for thank you to all our panelists for for their time and for sharing their experiences with us. And thank you to the audience, of course, and thank you to the Andy team for setting up this conversation. All right. And thank you, Sucharita, for sharing something around the Arthan conference. So, as Arthan, we are hosting our annual convening in New Delhi on the 5th of December. And Sucharita has kindly shared details in the chat. So, you can look at that and you can reach out to us if you have any questions. So, thank you again.
Yep. Thanks
Thank you,
so much
everyone.
for an absolutely stimulating discussion today, ladies. And I will hopefully see you on our sessions tomorrow and day after. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.